The storm had moved off before dawn, leaving the marsh creek fat and brown under the house. Pettigrew rode out from the courthouse along 3 miles of sandy road, his mount blowing hard at the last rise, and found the Dodd place leaning on its brick feet as if the house had dozed and woken wrong. He noted the distances first. From the front step to the creek bend, 45 paces. From the southeast pier to the softest patch of ground, 8. The carpenters, 2 brothers from the mill road, had already cribbed timbers under the joists and were working a jack with careful, even strokes. Each time the screw took, the clapboard shivered and gave a small, damp groan. Pettigrew disliked haste. He dismounted, looped his reins to the fence post, and took his leather folio from the saddlebag. Ephraim Dodd met him with a practiced welcome, hat off, smile like fresh planed wood. "Found your way through the wash, magistrate." "Creek ran to the orchard last night. Never seen it that bold." "I'll record the mark," Pettigrew said. He took the carpenter's chalk and drew a sober line where the water had licked the lowest clapboard, then made a note by the hour, 7:30, wind light from the east, clouds torn thin. Mercy Dodd watched from the threshold, hands hidden in her apron, eyes flicking from her husband to the jack and back. The younger carpenter knelt at the undermined pier with a spade and a mason's trowel. "Bricks held," he said without looking up. "Footings washed at the edges is all." He shaved away a thumb of earth and paused. "Huh. What have you?" Pettigrew asked. He stepped down, careful where his boots went, and smelled the raw clay. A sour, mineral reek with a sweetness like vinegar turned in a jar. The boy lifted a small object the color of old milk. It lay in his palm like a toy, smooth at one end, ridged at the other. "A bone," he said, puzzled more than alarmed. "Animal," Dodd said quickly, too quickly. "Marsh throws up all manner after a blow." Turtle likely Pettigrew took out his rule and measured the object from rounded head to the broken plane, 2 inches and a fraction. He set it back in the excavated earth rather than pocketing it, then pressed his boot heel gently to seat it where it had lain. "No need for speculation," he said. "We'll shore the pier, then consider other concerns." He walked the house perimeter with the older carpenter, counting the piers under his breath, tapping each brick stack with the rule's brass hinge. The creek gurgled thickly under the floor like a throat clearing. A blue heron stood in the shallows near the bend, motionless as a thought not yet formed. Chickens scratched along the fence line, and then, as the jack took another bite, went silent in unison, heads cocked. "Magistrate," Dodd said in his smooth voice behind him, "you will want tea." He had a way of making offers sound like decisions. They stood on the step while Mercy fetched the tray. The china rattled, a fine tremor. Her gaze moved to a point between the men's boots, to the pier, and then past them to the swollen water. Her lips shaped words Pettigrew could not hear. Prayer, perhaps, or only the counting women do when there is too much to remember. He made his notes aloud. Seasonal high water, recent storm scouring, soft loam under southeast pier. So Dodd would hear the matter set in plain terms. "We will require a return visit after the ground dries," he said. "I also wish to see your burial records for the quarter. The churchyard stands close, and springs make poor guardians of a wall." "Of course," Dodd said. "All in order." He did not ask why burial records concerned a listing house. He did not need to. Pettigrew let the remark hang, a small test of the air. Alice, the indentured girl, appeared in the shadow of the door with a basket of nails on her hip. She was slight, with the look of a bird that has learned not to hop until the hand retreats. She set the basket by the jam and looked past Pettigrew toward the undermined pier. River came up in the night, she said to no one in particular. Brought a barrel and took the washboard. Fetch more lamp oil, Mercy said, sharper than the task required. Alice went quickly, barefoot, leaving small crescents in the damp. They worked the jack in quarter turns until the house sat true, then packed fresh earth under the footing and tamped it with a flat stick wetted in the creek. Pettigrew watched the men do their ordinary work with ordinary tools. He trusted routines. Most accidents announce themselves not in thunder, but in the failure of a customary sound. He listened for that failure, the missed click, the valve that did not hiss, and heard only the creak and the steady clack of the jack's pawl. When the earth was firmed and the braces struck, he walked to the creek bend with his rule and marked the scum line on a cypress knee, noting it against the clappered mark. The heron lifted, flapped twice, and settled again farther off. Clouds thinned to gauze. From the pantry window came the faint clink of a chain against wood, then nothing, like a spoon tapping the lip of a jar and stopping mid-ring. He turned back. "I will call again tomorrow," he told Dodd. "If the ground keeps shape, no more is needed." Dodd smiled. "You are thorough, sir." It was not praise. It was placement. Pettigrew replaced his rule in the folio, tied the thong, and mounted. He had already formed the mild resolution that this was a simple case of flood and footing. He would enter it so in the ledger, and in a week the memory of the milk-colored bit of bone would be smaller than the line he wrote for it. He took up the reins. Alice had come to the fence, as if called by the sight of leaving. She stood with her hands on the top rail, hair damp at the temples, breath a little high from a run to the storehouse. "Sir," she said, low so that Dodd might not hear. "Do bones ever smell like cider vinegar when the earth is cut?" By noon of the same day, the creek had fallen a hand's breadth below the chalk Pettigrew left on the clapboard. But the vinegar's sour reek in the soft ground lingered, and Alice's question rode with him back from town like a burr in his cuff. He had entered the storm and footing in his ledger without flourish. Still, he packed his brass rule, a tin of sealing wax, and the small travel lamp he used for impressions when natural light failed. Tully waited at the fence, hat pinched in both hands, eyes set toward the southeast pier. "Went to look before sunup," he said without greeting. "Earth keeps no secrets after a blow. Found something else, sir." "Show me," Pettigrew said. He tied his mare, lifted the folio from the saddle, and followed the gravedigger around the angle of the house. The marsh creek talked in a lower voice now, brown water banded with yellow foam. Chickens angled back to their scratching, though now and again one would lift its head as if remembering a caution. Tully had marked the spot with a twig. He eased his trowel under a knob of clay and turned it as a baker might turn a loaf to test its rise. In the crumble lay a piece no larger than 3 fingers, end to end, scalloped with neat sockets. Pettigrew crouched, took out his rule, and measured the arch, then the thickness at the broken plane. Milk white, light as chalk, but smoother to the thumb. A child's jaw, he thought, without saying the word. "Could be pig," Tully offered, though he did not believe it. The gravedigger had a laborer's superstition against naming misfortune too early. Pettigrew respected the courtesy. Pettigrew set the jaw on a clean square of muslin from his folio, wrote in his small hand the hour and the precise place from the pier, 2 feet 7 inches, and then set his lamp near, shielding the flame with his palm against a fickle breeze. He softened a red pea of wax over the chimney, and made an impression of the tooth row on a strip, pressing evenly with a flat stick. Routine steadied his breath. He labeled the wax slip with pencil and bound the muslin with twine. Dodd came presently, hat in hand, smile ready as ever, a tray riding his palm like an offering. Sweet tea sweated in the glasses. The china clinked slightly. The man had worked out how to arrive without surprise. "Gentlemen," he said, "shall we go inside? Wife will fret at you bending in the sun." "We won't be long," Pettigrew said. He did not take the tea. "The footing must be checked again at low water." "Of course," Dodd said mildly. He opened his free hand toward the yard, hospitable, contained. In the doorway, Mercy hovered with a rag clutched in one fist. She'd folded and unfolded some small paper so often the edges had begun to fur, and she kept the crumple hidden in the pleats of her apron. Gabriel, the son, crossed behind her with a coil of rope on his shoulder. His glance went to the pantry and fell away. Pettigrew stood and brushed clay from his knee. The day had warmed. Gnats spun in a slow, punishing joy over the damp places. He walked the pier line again with the rule, calling out measurements to Tully, who noted them with a carpenter's pencil on a scrap of plank. "That plank goes in my folio when we're done," Pettigrew said. And Tully nodded. Dodd's smile did not shift. Across the yard, the older carpenter planed a brace clean, curls of pine sticking to his forearms with sweat. "Earth settling already," he said. "We'll tamp again come evening." "Do so," Pettigrew replied. "And leave the southeast alone for the moment." He kept his tone friendly. Requests made the same way as weather reports were seldom contested. They circled to the creek bend. The chalk mark on the cypress knee sat a finger's breadth above the present scum line. Falling then. Pettigrew recorded it. A blue heron lifted, flapped once, and settled against the far bank reeds. Even the bird seemed unwilling to commit. He listened for the failure of an ordinary sound, as always. The jacks missed click, a kettle failing to hiss, a door that should scrape, but does not. The house ticked and breathed as any old structure did. Nothing betrayed itself, and yet the air felt like a room after argument. The words gone, but the draft still under the door. "Mercy," Dodd called toward the open hall. "Bring the magistrate a glass." "No need," Pettigrew said, and Dodd stepped nearer, lowering his voice. "You concern yourself beyond footing," the man said, still courteous. "The churchyard is up the lane, true, but this house keeps itself." "I prefer records to preferences," Pettigrew answered, and inclined his head as if to close the subject. He collected the wax strip and the wrapped jaw, placed both in his folio, and tied the thong. A routine action, a point of control. Yet the small weight of muslin felt like the beginning of an inventory rather than an end. As he turned toward the porch, Mercy dropped her rag and bent too quickly to retrieve it, the paper sliver in her fist flashing, then disappearing again. He saw, in that close instant, 6 short strokes in a column, each with a name half-formed beside it. Then her hand flattened, and she smoothed her apron as if pressing a letter into silence. A bucket banged over somewhere inside, a wooden ring against planks, abrupt as an oath. Gabriel's voice followed. Nothing said, only a breath taken wrong. From the pantry, just once and so soft a man might mistake it for cutlery settling, came the small kiss of a chain against wood. And then the house held itself perfectly still. By late afternoon, the chalk he'd set on the cypress knee sat a finger lower than at noon. The creek fell with reluctance, banded in yellow foam. Pettigrew returned to the Dodd place with his folio underarm, the wax impression and the wrapped jaw nested where they belonged, and asked at once for the house ledger. He made his request as he made all such things. Plain, procedural, the way a man asks for a hammer when a nail shows. Dodd received him in the hall, the light there a strained gold through fly-specked glass. "Records," Dodd said, amiable as ever. He turned to a chest by the stair and drew out a calf-bound book with a brass hasp and a habit of having been opened. Mercy hovered at the threshold, as if wind could push her either way. Gabriel stood behind them with the coil of rope from earlier, the rope clean where a knot had been worried out and retied. Pettigrew took the book to the narrow table and set his rule beside it. The ledger smelt of iron gall and tallow and the damp that crawled up from the marsh through the bricks. He thumbed back from the present. Seed bought, a pig traded, a pair of boots mended. Then to the earlier quarter. The hand was firm. Names were neat. And then, where apprentice appeared, a sequence of leaves showed a careful absence. Stubs cut close with a blade, the remaining fibers combed so the gap looked almost like a binding fault. He measured the excision at the gutter. 1/8 of an inch shaved away over 3 consecutive gatherings. No spilled ink told on the edges. Whoever had removed the pages had patience and a steady wrist. "Household business," Dodd said mildly. "Some accounts ended poorly. I dislike untidiness." "Untidiness belongs to the world," Pettigrew said. "A ledger records it." He kept his voice even. He did not accuse. He wrote. In his small hand he marked the absences. 3 gatherings. Leaves 41 to 48, 49 to 56, 57 to 64. Removed cleanly. Position adjacent to apprentice entries. He closed the book gently, then opened it again to the current quarter, as if to teach his own irritation the discipline of a hinge. Heat pressed. The hall breathed with it. Flies circled the lamp chimney in a patient, miserable orbit. From the pantry came a faint smell like wet wool and iron, not strong enough to sight, strong enough to remember. He asked perfunctorily after distances. Churchyard gate to the house, 50 paces by his count. The spring head beyond the orchard, 110. The garden rows, 9, all well hoed. Dodd answered with the tolerances of a man used to command. "Has Tully been paid for the morning's assistance?" Pettigrew asked. "Of course," Dodd said. "He is a useful soul. We will not require him further. If the ground holds, it will hold," Pettigrew said, "until it does not." He let the sentence lie like a plank across a ditch. Alice passed through with a pan of scraps for the chickens. She kept to the wall and did not look at the magistrate until she reached the door. Then, briefly, like a bird that risks a drop in a high wind, she said, "Prayers are said below, sir." She watched Dodd as she spoke, which made the remark look like a child's inattention. Pettigrew did not look toward the pantry. He simply wrote a single word, "Prayers," on a scrap and slid it under the flyleaf of his folio. He asked to see burial records for the quarter. Dodd's brow only lifted a fraction. He had practiced the expression in glass somewhere. "You are thorough, sir." "A habit," Pettigrew said. Dodd fetched a separate thin book. Churchyard fee tallies, simple receipts. The dates followed the season. A fever spell in July, a drowned boy in August, whose name he remembered from a docket. The sums and signatures near the times of the missing ledger leaves fell silent. Pettigrew marked in pencil a brace along that quiet. 4 weeks with no entries at all, though harvest laborers came and went in numbers. A horsefly landed on the back of Pettigrew's hand. He flicked it away, then scratched an absent line where its feet had tickled. and felt the clog of heat behind his collar. The air had turned close. He found himself thinking of cellars and the way coolness could be less mercy than concealment. Out the open door, the marsh gave its small wet talk. A heron beat its wings twice and rose into the water glare, then settled, tail twitching as if uncertain about staying. Mercy stood very still, hands knotted at the waist. When Pettigrew met her eye, for a magistrate, he had a decent way of remembering to. She looked down quickly and worried the hem of her apron. A crease showed there from repeated folding, and along the crease a darker stripe where sweat had met paper. "Your receipts are incomplete," Pettigrew said to Dodd. "Harvest distracts men from proper signatures," Dodd replied. "You may scold the parish and print if it pleases." "Print dissolves censure like salt in rain," Pettigrew said. He closed the burial book and placed it on the ledger, aligning the spines so that some order might recommend itself. He asked to see the pantry, an ordinary request, wrapped in talk of damp and mouse sign. Dodd ushered him a step, no more, and stood with his hand upon the jamb, a casual block. "Nothing here but flour, salt pork, and the usual," Dodd said, smiling. The door was open a hand's breadth. The breath that came out had the mineral weight of a dug place. A chain might have kissed wood in there once. It did not now. Routine failed to declare itself only by degrees. Pettigrew measured the threshold, recorded the grain pattern where feet had scuffed, and let Dodd keep his posture. He gathered his folio. As he tied the thong, Mercy folded her hands, then unfolded them. In the moment when his glove lay open on the table, she stepped close under pretext of moving the tea tray. Her fingers, cool and decisive, pressed a slip of creased paper into the glove's palm and left it there. Her eyes did not lift. He slid the glove on over the paper and felt the crackle as it settled against his skin. Outside, the creek made its even falling sound. A wind shivered the cypress and then went dead. Pettigrew nodded his leave and stepped into the heat. Only when the hall darkened behind him did he open the glove a finger's width and see 6 short strokes with names half-formed, after chores. He tucked the slip deep and buttoned his coat, though the day did not require it. Tomorrow he would return with a warrant and a carpenter's bar. Morning brought a washed light and a breeze that worried the marsh grass into faint stripes. The chalk he'd set on the cypress knee stood 2 fingers above the present scum line. Pettigrew arrived with a folded warrant in his breast and the carpenter's bar wrapped in canvas beside his folio. In the hall, he asked for the pantry as one asks for a chair, ordinary, procedural. Dodd read the seal, smiled as if at a child's earnestness, and gestured with an open hand that somehow still blocked the jam. Pettigrew read aloud the single sentence that mattered and did not raise his voice. Gabriel came from the yard with the rope coil, and after a glance toward his father, slipped a key from his pocket. The brass tooth had polished a crescent in the boy's palm. Mercy stood behind them, fingers pleating her apron once, then still. Alice hovered in the shadow near the stove, eyes low, a tin of lamp oil under her arm. The pantry was narrow, flour bin left, salt pork hung from a beam, mouse sign in the corners. Pettigrew took his rule and measured the threshold. 32 inches clear, grain cross-scraped in 2 arcs, where heels turned. He knelt and laid the bar along the floorboards, 3 courses in. A hairline crack ran between 2 boards, darker than the others, dusted fine. He set the bars flat under the seam and leaned. The first board lifted a breath and squealed like a low fiddle note. The second gave after 2 steady strokes. Beneath lay a square framed with hand-planed rails, the sill marked with twin grooves, parallel as rains, the wood burnished darker, where something had pulled and returned. Pulled and returned. He marked the grooves with a stub of blue chalk from his pocket, set the pieces aside, and eased the hatch up. Coolness rose. A cellar cool, mineral, and used. He untied the lantern from his folio strap, wetted the wick, and coaxed flame. In the cone of light, the cavity showed itself as a shallow room under the pantry, no stand-up space. Only a coarse packing of soil tamped to a hardness that made the bar sound dull when he prodded. In the near corner, a scrap of ribbon, child's red gone brown, edge frayed where fingers had worried it. Nearer the far sill, a small round gleam where dust would not stick. "Storage," Dodd said easily. "We keep preserves below, on boards. Rats like to nest if we don't close it tight." "Rats carry ribbons, do they?" Pettigrew said. He lowered the lantern, reached with his rule, and teased the round object to where he could take it between thumb and forefinger. A pewter token, no bigger than a $50, stamped with a crude brand, a hooked D with a bar through its belly. The edge bore tooth marks shallow as weather. Gabriel, compelled by the shine, stepped close and then checked himself. "They drag keepsakes," he said. Not quite voice, as if he had been told this once and believed it because the telling was safer than doubt. Pettigrew wrapped the token in a twist of muslin, wrote the find place under sill 6 inches from left rail, then laid the twist in his folio with the wax impression and the jaw from yesterday. He did not hurry. He took the ribbon also, noting the length, 4 inches, one side soiled smooth, and the tamped earth, hard to an inch, then looser, and the chain grooves, 3/8 across, depth worn to a shallow trough at the bend. He made a small plan in pencil on a cut of cardboard, hatch, rails, grooves, so that memory would not police what the hand could draw. Dodd watched with the same light regard he had used for tea trays and courtesy replies. "You have had your look," he said. "Now nail it back. Wife does not like open places." Pettigrew kept the lantern steady and said nothing. He listened. The house gave its common ticks. Farther off, the creek worked at its own throat. From the yard came the steady shaving of the carpenter's plane and a hen's brief scold. In that list of ordinary sounds lay the absence he had been hunting since the storm, the missing scrape or hiss that tells a man his measure wants correction. Here it sat where the grooves sat, a habit rubbed into wood by repetition. Storage did not make that kind of mark. He tested the packed earth with the bar's tip. The surface resisted, then crumbled under pressure into a softer layer that showed finger smooth where someone had once patted it. He stopped. A magistrate who forgot the boundary between inspection and digging invited difficulties in court. He set the bar aside. Mercy let out a breath she had held so well, it seemed part of the room. Her eyes slid to the token in his folio and then to the ribbon in his other hand. She did not speak. She did not need to. The crease in her apron where papers had lived looked whiter today, a fresh ironing to hide what the hand had fretted. Pettigrew lowered the hatch carefully, set the boards back, and marked the nail heads so he would know if someone reset them between now and his return. He dusted his knees, closed the lantern, and wiped the soot on a rag he kept for that. Routine, again, to quiet the small rebellion in his chest. "Storage," Dodd repeated genially, as if 3 men had not just breathed a separate pocket of air. "Rats are a plague. We trap them. Then you will not mind a rat-proof bar across the hatch until the sheriff comes," Pettigrew said. "An hour's work." He addressed it to the carpenters, not to Dodd. The older brother nodded set down his plane, and reached for a brace and bit. A draft came up as if the house had sighed at the thought of being fastened. It smelt of wet wool and iron. Alice, in the doorway with the oil tin clutched to her chest, spoke so softly that only a man listening for a failure could hear her. "They were always quiet by dawn," she said. He had slept thinly with the warrant under his coat and woke to a sky the color of skimmed milk. By mid-morning, the creek had fallen another finger below his chalk on the cypress knee, and the air inside the Dodd house held a damp cool like a cellar that had learned to breathe. Pettigrew set his folio on the pantry table, loosened the rat-proof bar the carpenters had fixed the day prior, and lifted the hatch with the same care a man uses on a locked drawer that finally yields. Tully came with his canvas sack and iron spade, rope coiled tidy, face made of work. "Slow and square," Pettigrew said. He laid out twine in a grid, knots at 1-foot intervals, and numbered the squares in pencil on a card. He sharpened a carpenter's chalk to a thumb's width and drew a small tally mark on the joist above the hatch. 1. Then set the chalk within reach on a saucer so dust would not take it. Mercy hovered at the hall edge, apron neat, eyes on his hands. Dodd stayed out of the doorway, but his presence lived in the house the way varnish lives in old wood. They began. Tully shaved the tamped layer with a mason's trowel, no deeper than a finger joint, and Pettigrew brushed aside the loosened grit with a soft whisk. Soil changed color in small, honest ways. A paler seam where air had once threaded, darker crumbs where damp persisted. In the first square, the trowel met cloth. Burlap, coarsely woven, its fibers matted to a felt from long pressure. Pettigrew diaried the site. Square A1, burlap, orientation east-west, and cut around it with a table knife so the weave would keep whatever lay beneath in its shape. He spread muslin on a tray and slid the parcel atop, then chalked a second mark on the joist. 2. By noon, the house smelt of turned earth and old starch. Gnats looped in the lantern's periphery when clouds closed the light. From the yard, the carpenter's plane rose and fell like a patient saw. Now and again, a hen scolded and then thought better of it. Alice brought a pail of water and left it by the door without crossing the threshold. Her bare feet made crescents in the dust that filled at the edges and disappeared. Square B3 yielded a small radius of ribs, white as milk glass, ribs no larger than a man's handspan. Pettigrew set his rule, measured the arc, wrote the numbers in his small, dry script. He added a third tally to the joist. 3. He did not hurry his hand, even when his breath would have. Work wanted a steady clerk. He wrapped what must be wrapped, recorded what could be measured, and let the room tell what it could, by how it held or failed ordinary sounds. The chain grooves on the sill caught his eye whenever he lifted his head. Their polished troughs said habit more loudly than any mouth. By afternoon, the chalk row climbed, 5, then 8. Each mark a small blue admission. No coffins, only burlap remnants, and once, a reed mat cut to child size. In square C2, a pewter glint showed, and then was gone. The token had slipped into a pocket of looser soil like a coin in a bed tick. Pettigrew slowed the trowel, sifted with his fingers, and found it again. Tooth scratched, the same crude brand stamped hard, hooked D, with a bar through its belly. He wrapped it separately and wrote C2. Loose pocket under burlap. Token recovered. Behind him, Mercy's breath snagged and let go, a sound beside a sound. At the day's end, he stepped out to the creek bend and checked the scum line against his chalk on the knee. Falling, then steady. The heron stood again in the far reeds, neck tucked, undecided as any witness who has told enough to be troubled by it. When he came back in, he drew another mark on the joist. 9. The house took the count with a small wooden patience, as if it too had kept a ledger in its beams and merely waited for a man to write what it knew. The second morning began nearer to silence. Even the flies seemed dull in the cool. Dodd had gone to the orchard. Gabriel passed the doorway once with an empty pail and once with a full one. The boy's palm showed the crescent the key had made, now whitened where the skin had toughened. Pettigrew did not ask for the key. He did not need to. It had already done its principal work. They worked along the grid. Twine bit into Pettigrew's wrist where he leaned. Dust made a tacky paste along his glove seam. Tully uncovered a tangle of thin bones beneath burlap cut on the bias, and Pettigrew numbered each small pile with a square of card, set under a pebble so draft would not lift it. 11, 12. He took out the calf-bound household ledger Dodd had provided days before, and opened it to an emptiness where apprentice entries ought to run. He dated the squares in pencil as they came up and drew a brace across the missing weeks in the book. The seasons lined up, quiet in the ledger where burlap lay thickest in the earth. He kept his face turned to the work so that Dodd, if he came, would see only a man writing. At last, the room altered. Heat pooled. The lantern's air trembled a fraction, though no one touched it. Pettigrew felt that familiar warning, a customary sound missing, a small draft that had not been present and now was, before the trowel kissed a curve that was not dirt or cloth, but bone. He knelt close. The skull lay shallow, as if it had risen to meet the day. The sutures read like dry riverbeds. In the mouth, something round and dull sat where speech ought to have begun. "Hold," he said, and Tully's hand froze with soil on it, 5 inches from the find. Pettigrew brushed away the grit with the whisk's soft breath, then slid 2 fingers into the earth at the occiput and lifted the skull as a clerk might lift a globe from a shelf. 2 steady inches, 3. The round thing rolled, struck his boot, and made the smallest, unmistakable coin sound against leather. He looked down and saw pewter winking in the lantern light, stamped with the hooked D split by a bar.